A young doctor returns to his hometown and begins working at the local hospital. There, he reunites with an old childhood friend, now a nurse, and realizes that their friendship has evolved over the years into something deeper and harder to ignore. Michael Chen stood for a moment in front of the main entrance to Millbrook General Hospital, his hands unconsciously adjusting his navy blue tie under his spotless white coat. The five-story building, with its red brick facade and large glazed windows, seemed at once familiar and strangely different, like a familiar face seen after many years. "Welcome back, Dr. Chen," greeted the elderly receptionist, Mrs. Rodriguez, who still held the same post after so many years. Her warm smile brought back a flood of memories. Afternoons after school, doing homework in a chair at reception, waiting for her father to finish his appointments. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you haven't changed a bit," he replied, genuinely happy to see a familiar face on his first day as the hospital's cardiac surgeon. As he walked through the corridors towards the surgery department, each step echoed with memories. The distinctive smell of antiseptic and weak coffee remained unchanged, as did the beige linoleum floor that creaked softly under his feet. The walls, previously stark in their hospital white, now displayed colorful murals painted by pediatric patients, a welcome change that warmed the atmosphere. 15 years had passed since he ran through these same corridors as the son of Dr. Chen, the cardiologist. Now, at the age of 32, he returned as the newest member of the surgical team, carrying not only the weight of the stethoscope around his neck, but also the expectations that accompanied the Chen surname at Millbrook. He stopped in front of the operating room bulletin board, studying the duty roster, when he heard footsteps approaching. Something about the specific rhythm of his shoes against the floor triggered a distant memory, but before he could identify it, a familiar voice called out to him, "Dr. Chen." His heart skipped a beat as he turned around. There, standing in the corridor with a clipboard against her chest and a look of surprise in her expressive brown eyes, was Lucy Martinez. Time had been kind to her. Her face retained the same sweetness he remembered from his high school library days, although now it carried a maturity that only the years could bestow. "Lucy Martinez?" Her voice came out softer than she had intended, charged with an emotion she hadn't expected to feel. Her smile, that same smile that used to light up study afternoons, slowly opened, transforming her face. "I can't believe you're really back," she said, unconsciously adjusting the badge that identified her as the ICU's head nurse. "When I heard the rumors about the new surgeon, I never imagined it would be you." Michael felt something shift in his chest, like a puzzle piece finally finding its place. 15 years was enough time to change a person, a city, an entire hospital. But there, in that corridor with the beige linoleum floor, in front of Lucy Martinez's familiar smile, he felt as if part of him had never really left. "Well," he replied, an involuntary smile forming on his lips, "it looks like Millbrook has the power to bring us back." The moment was interrupted by the sharp sound of a beep. Lucy quickly checked the device on her belt. "ICU," she explained, already moving with the efficiency her profession demanded. "We need to catch up later, Chen. I still have coffee at the same time as usual." As he watched her walk away down the corridor, Michael realized that his return to Millbrook could mean much more than just the next step in his career. Something's changed, he thought, adjusting his stethoscope, and others just wait for the right moment to blossom. The surgical team's break room was silent at 5 in the morning, except for the gentle bubbling of the coffee maker and the low hum of the fluorescent lights. Michael watched the city wake up through the window, the first lights of the day painting the horizon in shades of purple. His first night shift had been intense, 3 emergency surgeries in a row. The door opened softly and Lucy walked in, carrying a pile of medical records. Her cheeks were still flushed from the cold in the corridor, and her normally impeccable ponytail had a few loose strands framing her face. "I thought I'd find you here," she said, depositing the files on the table. "Are you still addicted to coffee after your surgeries?" "Something's never changed," he replied, reaching for a second cup in the cupboard. He poured her coffee, remembering exactly how Lucy used to drink it, no sugar, with a touch of milk. The surprised look on her face when she realized he still remembered made his heart race slightly. "The last surgery," Lucy began, gently blowing on the hot coffee. "Reminded me of that time in the biology lab. Remember? When you were so determined to do the perfect dissection that we stayed for 2 hours after class." Michael laughed, leaning back in his chair. "And you stayed there with me, even though you had volleyball practice that day?" "Well, someone had to make sure you didn't pass out from hunger," she teased, her eyes sparkling with the shared memory. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Amanda Foster, head of the surgery department, a middle-aged woman with gold-framed glasses and a stern expression. "Chen, we need to discuss Mr. Richard's case. Martinez, you can join us. Your experience with the patient will be invaluable." As they followed Dr. Foster down the corridor, Michael noticed how Lucy naturally assumed her professional posture, reporting in detail on the patient's vital signs and changes in condition. It was fascinating to see how easily she moved between the Lucy he had known since he was a teenager and the respected head nurse she had become. In the conference room, in front of X-ray images and test results, the discussion about the complex heart surgery that Mr. Richards needed quickly became heated. Lucy advocated a more conservative approach, citing the patient's recent complications. Her arguments were precise, based on her daily experience of the case. "I disagree," Michael found himself saying, surprising himself. "The risks of waiting are greater than the benefits." He explained his position, aware of Lucy's intense gaze on him. It was the first time they had disagreed professionally, and the tension in the air was palpable. Dr. Foster listened to both sides before making her decision, opting for immediate surgery as Michael had suggested. When they left the room, Lucy was visibly frustrated. "Have you always been so adamant?" she asked, her voice low but charged with emotion. Michael stopped in the hallway, turning to face her. "Lucy, you know me. You know I wouldn't make this decision if I didn't believe it was the patient's best chance." She sighed, running her hand through her hair in a gesture he recognized as a sign of concern. "I knew you, Michael. 15 years is a long time." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, it seemed that there was more behind those words than just professional concern. The silence that followed was interrupted by the familiar sound of emergency beeps. Lucy checked the device on her belt. "I have to go," she said, already moving. "Just promise you'll consider what I said about the patient's history." Michael watched her go, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. 15 years was a long time. Long enough to turn two people who once shared all their dreams into almost strangers, each with their own convictions and battles. Still, as he walked back to his office, he couldn't ignore how his heart still recognized the rhythm of her footsteps moving away down the corridor, as if no time had passed. Mr. Richards' surgery lasted 7 hours. Michael maintained the absolute concentration that the delicate operation demanded, but was constantly aware of Lucy's presence on the other side of the operating table. She remained professional and focused, anticipating every need, passing instruments before he even had to ask. A silent dance that only years of experience could create. When they finally closed the last stitch, the relief in the room was palpable. The surgery had been a success, despite the complications Lucy had predicted. Michael removed his surgical mask, allowing himself a moment of exhaustion. "Great work, everyone," he said, but his eyes sought out Lucy's. She was already busy coordinating the transfer. She was already busy coordinating the patient's transfer to the ICU, efficient as always, but he noticed the tension in her shoulders. Later, while she was updating the medical records on the system, a cup of coffee appeared next to her. Lucy sat down in the neighboring chair, her own coffee in her hands. "You were right," she admitted after a moment's silence, "about the surgery, but I still think my concern was valid." Michael swiveled his chair to face her. "It always has been. That's why I trust your judgment so much." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Remember when we were teenagers, and you always made me see the other side of things? It's still like that." A small smile appeared on her lips. "Like that time you wanted to quit the drama club because you were nervous about the lead role? And you convinced me to keep going, saying that fear was just a sign that something mattered enough to scare us." Michael smiled at the memory. "I still use that advice, you know." The moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps in the corridor. Dr. Foster appeared in the doorway, her expression serious. "Chen, Martinez, we have an emergency. Car accident. multiple victims arriving. We need you. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. 3 victims of the accident, 2 requiring immediate surgery. Michael and Lucy worked side by side again, this time under extreme pressure. At a crucial moment, when the heart of one of the victims began to fail, it was Lucy who kept her cool, suggesting an approach that ended up saving the patient's life. It was after 2 in the morning when they finally had a moment to breathe. Michael found Lucy on the hospital terrace, her usual place of refuge after difficult shifts. She was leaning against the railing, watching the city lights. "This reminds me of prom night," she said without turning around, sensing his presence. "When we ran away from the party and came up here." Michael approached, stopping next to her. "You looked beautiful in that blue dress. And you were so nervous that you nearly spilled the punch on both of us," she laughed. But there was a note of melancholy in her voice. "Lucy," Michael began, turning to her. The moonlight illuminated her profile, and for a moment, he saw both the girl he had known and the strong woman she had become. "No," she interrupted him gently. "Sometimes it's better to leave some memories as they are." But her eyes told a different story when they met his. The distant sound of a siren broke the moment. Lucy stepped away from the railing, adjusting her uniform in an automatic gesture. "I need to check on the ICU patients." Before she could leave, Michael took her arm gently. "Will you have dinner with me tomorrow? Not as co-workers, not as old friends, just us." Lucy hesitated, her hand resting lightly on his. The contact sent an electric current through them both. "Michael, working together is complicated enough. Since when did we let complicated stop us from doing something we wanted to do?" He smiled, reminding her of all the times they had faced challenges together in the past. A small smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "Tomorrow at 8, she finally replied, before heading for the door. In the doorway, she stopped and looked back. "And Michael? Don't be late this time." Alone on the terrace, Michael felt his heart beating at a pace that even years of medical training couldn't explain. A few complications, he realized, were worth every accelerated beat. Michael adjusted the collar of his navy blue shirt for the 3rd time, looking at his reflection in the window of La Maison restaurant. The place was new to him. It had opened during his absence, but Lucy had mentioned that it was her favorite in the city. He arrived 10 minutes early, determined not to repeat the delays of his teenage years. At 8 o'clock sharp, Lucy walked through the door of the restaurant. She had swapped her hospital uniform for a simple black dress that fell softly to her knees, and her dark hair was loose, framing her face in a way that made Michael momentarily forget how to breathe. "You're early," she commented with a smile, as he pulled out the chair for her. "Impressive, Dr. Chon." "People can change," he replied, taking a seat opposite her. The soft candlelight danced between them, creating golden shadows. The sommelier approached with the wine list, and Michael noticed how Lucy chose with knowledge and confidence. "Since when have you been a wine expert?" "I took a course a few years ago," she explained, her eyes sparkling. "After," she hesitated for a moment, "after I broke up with David." Michael felt an unexpected pang of jealousy. David? The name was new to him, a part of her life he didn't know. David? Plastic surgeon. "We were together for 2 years. It ended 18 months ago." She took a sip of water, studying his reaction. "What about you? Any broken hearts left in Chicago?" "An almost engagement," he admitted. "Rebecca, we broke up when I decided to move back to Millbrook." A silence settled between them, laden with untold stories and paths not taken. The waiter brought the wine, offering a moment of distraction. "Why did you really come back?" Lucy asked after tasting the wine. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were intense, searching for more than the superficial answer he had given everyone. Michael turned the glass slowly, watching the red liquid. "Officially, the hospital has offered an excellent position, and my father is thinking of retiring." He paused, meeting her gaze. "But the truth is, Chicago never felt like home. There was always something missing. Something or someone." The question hung between them like a soap bubble, delicate and dangerous. Before Michael could answer, his phone vibrated. A message from the ICU. Complications with a patient. Seconds later, Lucy's phone also rang. "Mr. Richards," she said, getting up. ventricular tachycardia. They forgot the wine, the romantic dinner, in the unanswered questions. Within minutes, they were back at the hospital, her lab coat over her gown, her sleeves rolled up over his dress shirt. In the ICU, they worked in perfect synchrony, their hands dancing a familiar choreography over the patient's body. When they finally stabilized Mr. Richards, it was after midnight. "I think we owe la maison dinner," Michael commented as they walked through the hospital's empty parking lot. Lucy stopped under a lamppost, her black dress contrasting with her white coat. "You know what's funny? Tonight made me realize something." "What?" "That maybe we don't need fancy restaurants or expensive wines." She moved closer, absent-mindedly adjusting the lapel of his lab coat. "That's us, Michael. Lab coats over party clothes, emergencies in the middle of dinner parties, saving lives together." Michael covered her hand with his, keeping it on his chest. He could feel his own heart beating fast under her touch. "Lucy, it's complicated," she whispered, but didn't pull away. "It always has been," he replied, leaning in slightly. "Ever since that first afternoon in the library, when you were trying to explain cell biology to me, and all I could think about was how your eyes lit up when you talked about mitochondria." She laughed softly, the sound mingling with the distant noise of cicadas. "You were a terrible student. I had my distractions." His free hand found her face, fingers gently brushing her cheek. The shrill sound of an approaching ambulance broke the moment. Lucy pulled away gently, but her eyes remained fixed on his. "Tomorrow," she said. It wasn't a question. Breakfast in the hospital cafeteria. No expensive wines or expectations. "Just us," he added, watching her walk to her car. As he drove home that evening, Michael realized that perhaps Lucy was right. They didn't need to force a traditional romance. What they had was different, built on years of history, strengthened by shared challenges, tempered by the maturity that time had brought. It was complicated, yes, but it was also perfectly them. The hospital cafeteria was almost empty at 6 in the morning, the aroma of fresh coffee mingling with the smell of toast. Lucy was already there when Michael arrived, 2 cups of coffee on the table and a folder of medical records beside her. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, and small dark circles under her eyes were evidence of a bad night's sleep. "Difficult shift?" he asked, sitting down. "Mr. Richards had another complication in the middle of the night," she replied, pushing one of the cups towards him. "But we managed to stabilize him." Michael noticed how she avoided his gaze, concentrating on the papers in front of her. The intimacy of the night before seemed to have been replaced by a professional caution. "Lucy," he began, but was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Foster. "How nice to meet you both," said the head of surgery, pulling up a chair. "We need to discuss the new cardiac surgery protocol." The impromptu meeting lasted almost an hour. Lucy took an active part in the discussion, her suggestions precise and well-founded. Michael watched her with admiration, realizing what an exceptional professional she had become. When Dr. Foster finally left, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. "We need to talk about last night," Lucy finally said, closing the folder of medical records. "I don't regret it," Michael replied quickly, leaning forward. "It's not a question of regret, Michael," she sighed, running her hand over her face. "It's about professionalism, about limits, about—" Her beepers sounded, interrupting the conversation. The emergency in the ICU. They ran down the corridors together, arriving at the unit to find one of the post-surgical patients in cardiac arrest. The next 2 hours were a test of endurance and skill, their hands working together to save a life. When they finally managed to stabilize the patient, they were exhausted. Michael watched Lucy give precise instructions to the nursing team, her voice firm despite her obvious tiredness. "You're amazing," he said softly when they were alone in the prescription room. She froze for a moment, pin suspended over her chart. "Michael, we can't." "Why not?" He moved closer, keeping a professional distance, but his eyes intense on hers. "We're adults. We're professionals." "That's exactly why," she replied, meeting his gaze. "What happens if it doesn't work out? If we mix things up? If we lose that synchrony we have in the operating room because we're hurt by each other? What if it does work out?" His voice was soft but determined. What if it's exactly that synchronicity that makes us perfect for each other? Lucy closed her eyes for a moment, as if seeking strength. I have surgery in half an hour. Have dinner with me tonight? At my place? He saw the hesitation in her eyes and added, just to talk. We need to sort this out, Lucy. She nodded slowly. At 8. The day dragged on between appointments and procedures. Michael tried to concentrate on his patients, but his mind kept returning to Lucy, to the way their fingers brushed during the morning emergency, to the look they shared over the patient's gurney. At 7:30, he was at home preparing fresh pasta, a skill acquired during his years in Chicago. At 8 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Lucy was wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair still damp from the hospital shower. She looked younger this way, more vulnerable. I've made pasta, he said, leading her into the kitchen. Since when do you cook? She smiled, the first genuine smile of the day. People can change, he replied, repeating his words from the night before. While he finished the sauce, they talked about the day's events, about changes at the hospital, about shared memories. It was easy, natural, as it had always been between them. It was only after dinner, sitting on the sofa with glasses of wine, that Lucy finally broached the subject they had avoided. I'm afraid, she admitted, twirling her glass between her fingers. Afraid of losing you as a friend, as a colleague. Afraid of ruining something precious because of feelings that are maybe just nostalgia. Michael placed his glass on the coffee table and gently took hers too. Lucy, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. What I feel for you isn't nostalgia. It's present. It's real. He hesitated, searching for the right words. It's like that moment in surgery when everything fits perfectly, when every movement is synchronized, when you know exactly what the other needs before you even asked. She smiled sadly. You've always had a way with words, and you've always had a way of seeing through them. He leaned closer. Tell me what you see now. The silence between them was electric, full of possibilities. Lucy raised her hand, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. I see complications, she whispered. I see risks. Her hand went down to his chest, where she could feel his heart beating. But I also see you, Michael, as I always have. The kiss that followed was soft, hesitant, born of 15 years of waiting. When they parted, they both knew they had crossed a line from which there was no return. It's still complicated, she murmured against his lips. It always will be, he replied, pulling her closer. But some complications are worth diagnosing. The first joint surgery after the kiss was a test of professionalism. Michael smelled Lucy's soft perfume every time she approached to pass an instrument, and their hands brushed more often than necessary. The tension in the room was palpable, albeit muted. Tweezer, Lucy requested, her voice perfectly controlled. When their fingers met over the instrument, they both hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Dr. Foster, who was observing the surgery, to raise an eyebrow. Something wrong, Dr. Chen? The head of surgery asked, her sharp tone cutting through the air. No, doctor, Michael replied, forcing himself to focus on the procedure. Just evaluating the next step. After the surgery, as they washed their hands, Lucy kept her eyes fixed on the running water. This can't happen again, she muttered. That hesitation, it was dangerous. It was a moment, Michael argued, lowering his voice as a nurse passed them. It happens. It can't happen. Lucy turned off the tap with more force than necessary. Not with us. Not in the operating room. Before she could reply, they were interrupted by the arrival of a new resident, Dr. James Wilson, recently transferred from Boston. Tall, articulate, and clearly competent, Wilson immediately engaged Lucy in a discussion about post-operative protocols. Michael watched the interaction with growing annoyance, especially when Lucy laughed at something Wilson said. It was a laugh he knew well, genuine, disarming. Dr. Chan. Dr. Foster's voice surprised him. A moment in my office? Michael's heart raced as he followed his boss. Had she noticed something more than just a hesitation in the operating room? Close the door, she instructed, taking a seat behind her desk. Michael, I'm going to be blunt. Your father came to see me today. It wasn't what he expected to hear. My father? He's considering early retirement. He wants to know if you're ready to take on his cases. She studied him over her glasses. But before I answer, I need to make sure you're focused. I'm always focused, doctor. Really? She leaned forward. Because today in the operating room I saw something that worried me. And it wasn't just a hesitation with a clamp. Michael kept his face neutral, years of medical training helping him mask his anxiety. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. She sighed, removing her glasses. Look, I'm not blind. I see the way you and Lucy look at each other. I see the story there. But I need you to understand something. This hospital is not a high school revival. I've never treated my job like that, he replied, feeling a twinge of irritation. No? She arched an eyebrow, then explained to me why one of my best surgical teams was looking like two nervous teenagers today. Michael opened his mouth to protest, but she held up a hand, silencing him. I don't want to know the details. I just want to make sure that whatever the situation is between you, it doesn't affect this hospital. She put her glasses back on. Are we clear? Perfectly. Leaving the office, Michael found Lucy talking to Wilson near the nurse's station. There was an ease to their interaction that bothered him deeply. Lucy, he called, approaching. Can we talk? She nodded, saying goodbye to Wilson. Michael led her into the empty break room, closing the door behind them. Dr. Foster knows, he said quietly. What? Lucy paled slightly. How? Not explicitly, but he ran a hand through his hair in frustration. She realized something today, and my father wants me to take over his cases. Michael, Lucy moved closer, touching his arm gently. This is incredible. It's what you've always wanted. It is, but he captured her hand, intertwining their fingers. I don't want to have to choose between this and you. No one's asking you to choose, she said softly, although her eyes betrayed her concern. No? He laughed humorlessly. Because it seems that everyone has an opinion about both of us. Dr. Foster, probably the whole team, even that new resident. Dr. Wilson? Lucy frowned. What's he got to do with it? Nothing, Michael answered too quickly. Just the way he looks at you. A small smile appeared on her lips. Are you jealous, Dr. Chen? Maybe. He pulled her closer, leaning his forehead against hers. Is it that obvious? Like a heart murmur in aortic stenosis, she murmured, before gently pulling away. But that just proves my point. We need to be more careful. Or more honest, he suggested. Come clean. In the speculation, Lucy shook her head. It's not that simple. You're about to take over your father's cases. I've just been promoted to head of the ICU. Timing is everything, Michael. You should know that better than anyone. The familiar sound of their beepers interrupted them, a familiar symphony of simultaneous emergencies. Later, he asked, already moving towards the door. Later, she confirmed, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice that made him wonder if they were talking about the same later. As he rushed to attend to his emergency, Michael realized that perhaps the real challenge wasn't hiding his feelings, but learning to navigate them in an environment where every decision, every hesitation, every glance could have consequences far beyond their racing hearts. The storm arrived without warning, turning a calm night on duty into a chaos of emergencies. A multiple accident on the highway brought 5 critical victims simultaneously, all requiring immediate surgery. The sound of sirens mixed with the drumming of heavy rain against the hospital windows. I need all available teams. Dr. Foster's voice echoed through the emergency room. Chian, room 1. Wilson, room 2. Martinez, coordinate the ICUs. Michael and Lucy exchanged a quick glance before separating. They hadn't spoken properly since the discussion about keeping their relationship a secret, and the tension between them was palpable. In the operating room, Michael focused on the patient in front of him, a middle-aged man with severe chest trauma. Across the corridor, through the glass windows, he could see Wilson operating, his posture confident as he worked. Pressure dropping, warned the nurse next to him. Michael forced his attention back to the patient. More blood now. We need... A movement at the door interrupted him. Lucy rushed in, still adjusting her surgical mask. I've lost the patient from room 2, she informed him. her professional voice masking her emotion. "I came to help here." "I thought Wilson," Michael began. "He's on another critical case right now." She was already at his side, assessing the situation. "What have we got?" They worked in sync for hours, struggling to stabilize the patient. The familiarity of their movements, the way they anticipated each other's needs, was even more evident under pressure. It was when they were almost finished that everything changed. "Fibrillation," Lucy warned, her eyes meeting Michael's over the mast. "Starting cardiac massage," he replied automatically, but something in his tone made Lucy hesitate. "Michael, your hand is shaking. Don't turn it into a competition." "It's not about competition." He turned to face her. "It's about everything. About trying to be perfect all the time. About trying to prove that I can take on my father's cases, that I can keep our relationship a secret, that I can." "Nobody asked you to be perfect," she interrupted, moving closer. "And maybe we're trying to control something that can't be controlled." "What do you mean?" "That." She gestured between them. "We, trying to compartmentalize, to separate the professional from the personal, as if we could turn off what we feel during the surgeries." Michael took a step towards her. "So what do you suggest?" Before Lucy could answer, the door opened. Dr. Wilson entered, stopping abruptly when he saw the scene. "Sorry," he said, his gaze alternating between the two of them. "I just wanted to report that the patient is stable." "Good work today, Lucy." The use of his first name didn't go unnoticed by Michael. Lucy must have noticed his tension, because as soon as Wilson left, she put a hand on his arm. "Michael, no," he interrupted her gently. "You're right. We can't go on like this. Something has to change." It was at that moment that Dr. Foster appeared in the doorway. "Chun, can we talk? It's about your father's succession." Lucy squeezed his arm lightly before turning away. "Go on. We'll talk later." Following Dr. Foster down the corridor, Michael felt the weight of the last few hours, the last few days, the last few weeks. Something had to give. The question was, what? "Your father wants to announce his retirement next week," Dr. Foster informed him when they reached his office. "But after what happened today, it was an isolated moment," he defended himself. "It was a symptom," she corrected, "of something bigger, and we both know what it is." Michael remained silent, his heart beating wildly. "You have until tomorrow to tell me if you're ready to take the position," she continued, "and to sort out any distractions that might compromise your judgment." Leaving the office, Michael saw Lucy at the end of the corridor, talking to Wilson again. He noticed how she smiled, how relaxed, professional, competent she seemed, everything he should be at the moment. His beeper went off, another emergency, another decision, another moment when he would have to choose between what his heart wanted and what his career demanded. The storm outside continued, relentless, as if mirroring the turbulence inside. Something needed to change, yes, but as he rushed to answer the call, Michael realized that perhaps the most difficult change would be to accept that not every diagnosis has a simple cure. The morning after the storm brought a peculiar silence to the hospital. Michael was on the terrace, watching the sunrise tint the sky pink and gold. The air still damp from the night's rain. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the whole night rethinking every decision that had brought him here. "I thought I'd find you here." He didn't have to turn around to know it was Lucy. Her soft footsteps on the wet floor were unmistakable. "Remember the first time we came here?" she asked, stopping beside him. "The day you decided to become a doctor? After my father saved that girl in the cafeteria," Michael added, a small smile appearing on his lips. "You said I'd be an even better doctor than him. And I was right." Lucy turned to face him. "Even if you don't believe it now." Michael finally faced her. She looked tired, but her eyes held that determination he had always admired. "I've made a decision," they said simultaneously, and laughed, the tension breaking slightly. "You first," Lucy offered. Michael took a deep breath, turning completely towards her. "I'm going to refuse my father's position." "What?" Lucy widened her eyes. "Michael, no. It's your dream. It's—" "No," he interrupted her gently. "It was my father's dream. I came back to Millbrook thinking it was what I wanted, but—" he took a step towards her. I realized I came back for another reason. Michael, let me finish. He took your hands in his. Last night, after everything, I was thinking about what really makes me happy here. It's not the position, it's not the prestige, it's working alongside you. It's the way we move in sync in the operating room. It's how you know me better than I know myself sometimes. Lucy clasped her hands together, but her eyes were watery. I've also made a decision, she said softly. I've asked for a transfer to the cardiac unit in Boston. The silence that followed was deafening. Why? Michael managed to ask. Because you deserve this position, she replied, her voice firm despite the tears she was holding back. Because you're a brilliant surgeon when you're not worried about balancing your feelings for me with your responsibilities. Because, she released one hand to touch his face. Because sometimes loving someone means giving them space to shine. No, Michael held her hand against his cheek. I don't accept that. It's not your decision to. Yes, it is, he interrupted her. Because this isn't about sacrifice, Lucy. It's not about one of us giving up something for the other. It's about being honest about what we really want. Just then, the terrace door opened. Dr. Foster emerged, her expression unreadable as she saw the scene before her. Have you made your decision, Dr. Chin? Michael didn't let go of Lucy's hand. Yes, I'm not going to take over my father's position. Interesting, Dr. Foster replied, a slight smile appearing on her lips. Because I just received a very interesting email from Dr. Wilson. He's accepting a position as chief of surgery in Boston. Lucy and Michael exchanged a puzzled look. Which means, Dr. Foster continued, that I have a different proposal. Dr. Chen, I still want you as chief surgeon here, but in a different structure. A co-chief, in fact. She looked directly at Lucy. With someone who complements your skills. Someone who has already proved themselves capable of leading in times of crisis. Co-chief? Lucy repeated, incredulous. Yes, you two proved yesterday that you're strongly together, even under extreme pressure. Dr. Foster adjusted her glasses. And frankly, I'm tired of pretending I don't see what's going on between you. I'd rather have it out in the open and professionally managed. What about my father? Michael asked. It was his idea. She smiled. He said it was about time Millbrook had a more modern approach to leadership. By the time Dr. Foster left, leaving them alone again, the sun had fully risen, bathing the terrace in golden light. So, Michael said, pulling Lucy closer, are you still going to Boston? She smiled, that smile he'd known since he was a teenager, which always made his heart race. I think Millbrook still needs us. Us, he repeated, leaning his forehead against hers. I like the sound of that. It's going to be complicated, she warned, although her eyes were shining. It always has been, he replied, leaning in to kiss her. But now we don't have to pretend it isn't. The sound of the first helicopters of the day cut through the morning air, and soon their beepers would begin to sound, calling them to another day of emergencies and difficult decisions. But something had fundamentally changed. It wasn't just the sunrise or the clear air after the storm. It was the certainty that some complications don't need to be solved, just accepted, understood, and transformed into something stronger. Like a heart that finds its natural rhythm after an arrhythmia, they had finally found their own rhythm. Together,